I tried a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Emerald Rogue with only shinies. Pokemon Emerald Rogue reimagines the regular game of Pokemon Emerald as an ultra-death permadeath roguelike with Pokemon from generations 1 through 8. To make it harder, it's a Nuzlocke. In a Nuzlocke, if a Pokemon faints, it's dead forever and I can only catch the first shiny per new area. The rest of the rules for this playthrough are on the screen and description down below. Let's jump right into it. As per a usual Pokemon playthrough, we get to pick our starter, in this case being a Meditite, T-Dot, and a Murkrow. None of these guys can be shiny as they're shiny locked, a curse that has affected many Pokemon, so in this case I pick Murkrow because, well, why not? With that, we're ready to jump into the world of Pokemon Emerald Rogue. As I enter the Foreboding Hall, there's no turning back, so let's do this. We're dumped into this hub world with all of these paths with items. The tree, rock, and boulder represent routes where you can fight randomized trainers, find items, and most importantly, get new encounters. The people represent item shops where you can buy useful held items and overall general items. At the end of the board is a boss battle. I've randomized all boss battles so they can be any gym leader, elite 4 member, and even champion from Kanto, Johto, or Hoenn. Defeat the boss, the level cap rises, and you rinse and repeat until all 8 gym leaders, 4 elite 4 members, and 2 champions are defeated. The Elite 4 members and champions are also randomized, so I really can't prepare, which make things that much harder. Speaking of making things harder, all Mega Evolutions, Z-moves, and Legendaries are completely banned. I've used Legendaries in past runs because the trainers use them sometimes, but without them, it's going to be a lot harder. I go with an average sharp route for my first board and begin looking for a shiny. Eventually, I find a shiny Mantike. Mantike is a great Pokemon, and Taft here will be great. Never mind, he died to a random Caparaja, so this means it's time for attempt 2, I guess. After going through the Dark Tunnel again, I find a shiny Geodude. Wilson here is an amazing Pokemon, and never mind, he died to a random Zubat. Well, I guess it's time for another reset. After going through the tunnel again, I find a shiny Zigzagoon named Madison and a shiny Jangmo-O named Adams. And after going through a battle rest prep stop, I buy a Rocky Helmet. And this means I'm ready to take on the first randomized gym leader, in this case being Whitney. Oh great, it's a crybaby. She leads off with a Dunsparce and I lead with Madison. A headbutt flinches but does a lot less damage than I expected because look at this BST. Luckily I do get off another headbutt as Dunsparce retaliates with a Screech. This isn't looking good, so I switch out onto Wilson, but Dunsparce has a parting gift with a Pursuit, and with the defense drop, I'm left with just 3 HP. Adams can't do much, so I go for a Protect, as Dunsparce goes for a failed Pursuit. I then try to go for a Bide, as Dunsparce goes for a Pursuit for around a 7th. After tanking another Pursuit, Adams retaliates with all of that baby rage, which barely leaves Dunsparce alive, and it retaliates with a Mudslap. Luckily, I had a tackle on the following turn to take the stupid slug out, but we're nowhere near out of the woods yet as Stantler comes in with an Intimidate. In fact, a Stomp leaves me with just 2 HP before I hit a tackle, which this thing eats up, and then it takes out Adams with an Astonish. And you know what they say, when you have a Zigzagoon with 3 HP left, you're getting destroyed, and that's exactly what happens here, so I guess it's time for another reset. After going through the tunnel one last time, I find Fillmore the shiny Carvanha and Roosevelt the shiny Archon, both great Pokemon and better than the last 3 attempts combined. With that, we can go ahead and face the first boss again, but this time it's Brock, and if you know anything about Brock, he's all bark but no bite. He leads off with his Cursula and I with Fillmore. Fillmore is holding a Razor Claw to boost his critical hit ratio, so that already helps out a ton. The Focus Energy I set up on the first turn boosted even further as Corsola hits a super hard bubble. Like, come on, you're not supposed to hit that hard. I mean, after all, Coral is dying. Luckily, an Aqua Jet actually managed to get the critical hit and do decent damage as a bubble leaves me with just a little bit of HP left. Another Aqua Jet brings Corsola into the yellow as I tank a Bubble Beam, which leaves me with just 1 HP. Luckily, since Aqua Jet is priority, another one picks up the KO. From there, it's basically all over, as Geodude and Onix fall to a stab-boosted, critical hit Aqua Jet apiece, winning me the battle and the first gym badge. On a calm warm route, I found Pierce the Tepig. Emboar has an amazing shiny, so I'm definitely looking forward to using him. I also find Harrison the Snorunt, who is a decent Pokemon with Ice Shard and Ice Fang, so it'll be great into ground and dragon Pokemon. With these 2 members, we're off to face the Fire-type gym leader, Blaine, for the second gym badge. Blaine is normally a pushover, but in this game he could have any fire type. He leads with Litleo and I with Fillmore. Fillmore immediately gets a critical hit with its Razor Fang to just take Litleo out. Blaine's second Pokemon is a Salandit, who also goes down to 1 priority Aqua Jet. And then this is where things become tricky as Litwick comes in. An Aqua Jet barely leaves the Ghost Candle alive before I get hit with a Will-O-Wisp, nerfing my attack. At the very least, an Aqua Jet on the following turn is able to pick up the KO, so at least Litwick is dealt with. And then Blaine's final Pokemon is Torkoal. Torkoal has the ability Drought, which immediately sets up the Sun, boosting fire attacks and nerfing water moves. I switch into Pierce, who's now evolved into a Pignite, as Torkoal sets up a Curse, boosting its stats. Great. I then hit a 2-turn Arm Thrust, which is very little damage as Torkoal sets up another Curse. I then hit a 5-turn Arm Thrust, which only does a bit of damage because of all the defense boosts and because of the turtle's overall bulk. I do get off another Arm Thrust, which only hits twice as Torkoal sets up a 3rd Curse. Another set of Arm Thrusts leaves the turtle barely alive as he retaliates with a massive sun-boosted Flame Wheel, doing more than half of my HP, before a final set of Arm Thrusts are enough for the KO, winning me the battle. Honestly, had Torkoal gotten a critical hit, we would have been completely destroyed and probably had to go on to attempt 5. After this, I go fish for a new encounter, in this case being Harding the Yamper. Yamper is such a cute, fluffy boy, and oh my god, I have no idea what I was thinking when I came up with that line. After this, a new type of encounter opens up, being a game show. How it works is you have 2 choices, one good and one bad, and you pick one without knowing if it's good or bad. So naturally, I completely screw things up. For my first choice, my newly caught Hoover is taking a snooze, so that's great, and since this old guy seems to hate me, Fillmore becomes weaker, which won't come back to bite me later. But hey, it's worth it, because like in Mr. B's video, I win 10 grand, but then I immediately lose it all to taxes, so that's fun. Anyway, that's the first and last time we're ever doing that. We can go ahead after this and take on the 3rd gym leader Drake and his dragons. A couple of my Pokemon have evolved, including Fillmore and Harding, so the added bulk is definitely nice. It's not like it's really going to matter against Dreepy though, because well, it's a Dreepy. Anyway, I lead with Pierce, who gets outsped with a Soft Astonish, which flinches. I then act like an idiot because I forgot fighting doesn't hit ghosts, so I go for an Arm Thrust not once, but 3 separate times. It's not like Dreepy is doing anything because even after 3 turns, I'm sitting at pretty high HP. However, I do end up switching into Fillmore, whose Dark type completely walls this thing. On the following turn, I get off Rough Skin Chip, which is great because my Ice Fang misses as Dreepy goes for an Infestation, doing passive damage each turn. Infestation isn't really a problem right now, but it can be because I have very little HP. I only have 97, which is not good for a fully evolved Pokemon. Anyway, after taking some Infestation damage, I go for an Ice Fang, which immediately picks up the KO because, well, it's a Dreepy. Anyway, Tyrant comes in, and I go for an Ice Fang, which barely leaves the dinosaur alive, but then he makes a crucial mistake and goes for a Dragon Tail. This brings in Pierce, meaning Tyrant has to have a Death Wish. In fact, a set of Arm Thrusts on the following turn is enough to get the KO. This causes Drake to send in Goomy. For whatever reason, I decide to switch into Hoover on a Rain Dance, which is what I was scared of. Luckily, this thing is just so weak that I'm able to go for a neutral strong boosted Crunch on the following turn, which gets the KO. This just leaves Drake's Duraludon, so we're not quite out of the woods yet, especially for how powerful this thing is this early in the game. I'm able to go for a Charm to lower the Skyscraper's attack before she sets up a Hone Claws, getting back up to neutral attack. I can't really touch this thing, so I switch into Pierce as Duraludon sets up to +1 with Hone Claws. Duraludon then gets up to +3 as I hit a Flamethrower for around a third of Duraludon's HP. Luckily, Duraludon is really never able to take advantage of those Hone Claws because a few Arm Thrusts get the KO, winning me the battle and the 3rd gym badge. This means it's back to the board where I go for an average energetic route and look for another shiny. But before I can do that, a few of my Pokemon evolve. The first is Pierce into Shiny Emborg, which, come on, look at him, it's an amazing shiny. The second is Roosevelt the Archeops, who also has a pretty cool shiny. Anyway, my encounter ends up being Garfield the Bronzor, and with some careful training, they quickly evolve into Garfield the Bronzong. Now here's where things get interesting, as the PC box has been completely removed. This means if we want a new Pokemon, we're gonna have to kick one off the team. And as much as I want a shiny Incineroar, I mean, come on, look at this shiny, I'm gonna have to add this guy to the failed shiny counter. It's not like Incineroar would have done any good into Falconer, the next gym leader, so I'm not too upset. Falconer leads with a Furo, and I with Harrison, who's now evolved into a Glalie. An Ice Shard does massive damage as the normal bird sets up an agility. It's not like it really matters as Ice Shard is priority, which just takes it out. Second is Skarmy, who could destroy us, so I switch into Hoover on a Steel Wing. And then on the following turn, I go for a Spark, which paralyzes the Tin Bird and puts him into the yellow HP range. And then a second Spark picks up the KO, which baits in Sigilyph. Sigilyph takes massive damage from a Spark, and I actually get the paralysis as the weird bird goes for a Gravity. Honestly, I'm not sure what that move does. Third is Oricorio, and Hoover fires off a massive Spark, barely leaving the dancer alive as it goes for a Revelation Dance, which does a decent amount of damage. Since I outspeed, another Spark is enough for the KO. Last for Falconer is his Noibat, and looking back in post, I was completely fine to stay in. Anyway, I don't want to assume anything, so I switch into Roosevelt on a Whirlwind. It's not like it really matters because a Dragon Breath is enough for the KO, winning me the battle and the badge. After this on a route, I find a Toxtricity, which I want to replace Hoover with, and my second encounter ends up being the shiny Toxtricity. However, Hoover doesn't really want to go because Toxtricity poisons a bunch of my team members and almost kills Hoover. That was close, but I have another chance to replace Hoover as the next route has a coin flip between Arctozolt and Snom, so naturally the shiny gods give me Snom. It's official, I've had 2 chances to replace Hoover and neither have worked out, so Hoover is definitely here to stay. In fact, I actually buy a magnet for Hoover to boost his electric moves or something. Honestly, this bit's getting a bit repetitive. It's not like Hoover would have done much work into Jasmine, the Steel-type trainer. She leads with Klinklang and I with Pierce. Klinklang goes for a Metal Sound before I hit a Fire Gem boosted Flamethrower, which gets the clean one-shot. Jasmine then proceeds to show me Empoleon, who could easily end me with a water move. Her second Pokemon is an Empoleon, which completely walls me, so I switch into Hoover on a Brine. A Spark on the next turn does decent damage as I tank another Brine. Luckily, I outspeed and kill with another Spark. Third is Stunfisk, who completely walls me. I switch into Roosevelt on a Muddy Water, which does a decent amount of damage. I then U-turn into Harrison for a bit of chip as Stunfisk luckily goes for another Muddy Water. I then go for an Ice Shard for a bit of chip as Stunfisk goes for a Snap Trap. I then hit an Ice Fang for a bit of damage on the following turn as Stunfisk luckily misses a Fissure. Had that Fissure have landed, we would have been dead. Luckily, a few more moves take out Stunfisk as I take passive damage from the Snap Trap. Since I'm low as Caparaja comes in, I switch into Pierce on a Dig. I decide to stay in and go for an Arm Thrust, which of course misses as Dig does more than half of my HP. I actually decide to stay in here and go for a set of Arm Thrusts, 4 exactly, which do massive damage but barely leave Caparaja alive as he goes for another Dig. This isn't really looking good, so I have to switch out into something. I end up switching into Roosevelt on a Dig, which obviously doesn't do any damage. I then go for a Dragon Breath, which obviously picks up the KO. Jasmine's last Pokemon is Klefki, who manages to outspeed and set up a Magic Room as I go for a U-turn for a bit of chip into Pierce, who's at low HP. Klefki then throws the entire game by going for a Heal Block as I go for a Flamethrower, which is enough for the KO, winning me the battle and the 5th gym badge. After this, it's back to the board. In Pelberg Forest, there are no new encounters, so I don't want to get a shiny, but the next route is a completely different story because this route has some really cool Pokemon. I need a flying type because we don't have a good matchup against fighting types, and of course I find a shiny superior. As much as I love the shiny, it's going to be added to the failed shiny list. Luckily I pick up the TM for Thunderbolt, which is all I need in preparation to fight Lorelei, the ice type trainer, for my 6th gym badge. Lorelei leads with Rotom, and against the Fridge I lead off with Pierce. Rotom goes for a charge to charge the next electric attack as a Flamethrower does around half. Rotom then outspeeds and it's a massive discharge before I get the KO with a Flamethrower. Second is Snom, and this thing is so weak that it just falls to 1 Flamethrower. Third is Avalugg, and since I'm low I pivot into Roosevelt on a Double Edge, which is resisted. I then go for an Ancient Power, and from there it's completely over as Ancient Power sweeps the rest of Lorelei's team, winning me the 6th gym badge. After this, some new encounters open up. There is a standard board, but there isn't much, and I don't really want anything from there. The next is a Dark Deal, but I actually don't want this one because even though I'll get something good, the price is not worth it. Then there's a Legendary board. Obviously Legendaries are banned, but I was curious as to see what the Legendary was, and it turns out to be Moltres, so that's pretty cool. After this, we can fight Sydney and his Dark types for badge number 7. He leads with Sableye and I with Pierce. Pierce outspeeds and it's a Flamethrower, leaving Sableye in the yellow as Sableye goes for a Foul Play. This means a Flamethrower on the following turn is enough to pick up the KO. Sydney's second Pokemon is Crocodile, and this is actually a problem because it can hit Pierce with super effective ground attacks. I switch into Fillmore on an Earthquake, which actually does a massive amount of damage. This isn't looking good. I go for the priority Aqua Jet, but then I watch Fillmore get the life sucked out of him with an Earthquake, marking the first death of the run. At the very least, Harrison is able to come in and go for an Ice Shard, which barely leaves Crocodile alive as he goes for a Charm. This is not looking good. At the very least, Harrison is eventually able to pick up the KO with an Ice Shard, but still, this is not looking good. Sydney's third Pokemon is Bisharp, so I switch into Pierce as this thing goes for a Swords Dance. Luckily, on the following turn, I'm able to go for 2 arm thrusts to get the KO before Bisharp is able to capitalize on those Swords Dances. If Bisharp had attacked, it wouldn't have really been a big deal since we resist all of its moves. Sydney's fourth Pokemon is Cacturne, and they try to set up a nasty plot, and I hit a Flamethrower, but this thing turns out to be a Zoroark. A +1 Zoroark is bad, but luckily it just goes for a failed Imprison on the following turn, meaning I'm able to go for a neutral Flamethrower to pick up the KO. After this, it's Absolute comes in, and they try to set up a Future Sight before being brutally murdered by a set of arm thrusts. Last from Sydney is his Cacturne, who gets destroyed by a Flamethrower, winning me the battle and the 7th gym badge, but not without a cost. RIP Fillmore. May he be buried in Forest Lawn Cemetery. Anyway, I have to go find a replacement for Fillmore, and I find Hayes the Crocodile. Why do I have the feeling that this guy had something to do with a reconstruction of some sorts? In the process of catching this guy, we almost lose Garfield, which could have been bad, but luckily doesn't happen, so after healing up, we're ready for the next boss battle. This time it's against Chuck for badge number 8. I lead with Roosevelt against his lead Throw. Throw goes for an Endure, meaning it lives my Acrobatics. It's not like it really matters because on the next turn, a second Acrobatics is enough to pick up the KO. Second is Sog, who goes for an Endure, meaning it lives my Acrobatics. Once again, it's not like it matters because another Acrobatics is enough for the KO. Chuck then shows me Zapdos, but he actually falls to 1 Acrobatics. Then Heracross comes in, who obviously falls to another Acrobatics. In fact, from there, Roosevelt is able to sweep Chuck's entire team without taking a single point of damage, winning me the 8th and final gym badge. Now with that, we can go ahead and face the Elite Four and 2 champions. In this game, they're not a gauntlet, and you just proceed through the routes like normal, which is a godsend because we can heal up, get new items, and even get new encounters. Also, there are no encounters I really want to replace any of my Pokemon with, so we can immediately face the first Elite Four member, Liza. She leads off with Mr. Mime, and I with Hoover. A Crunch does decent damage into Mr. Mime as he goes for a roleplay which copies my ability, which, let's be real, is kind of useless on a Psychic type. Luckily, another Crunch seals the deal, which baits in Claydol. I decide to stay in and hit a Crunch which barely gets the KO as I get hit with a hard Earth Power. Luckily, I outspeed and kill with a Crunch. Third is Espeon, and since I'm low, I switch into Harrison on a hard Psychic. I hit a priority Ice Shard on the next turn, which is a decent bit of damage as I tank another Psychic that gets the drop. Luckily, I outspeed on the next turn and KO with a Crunch. Liza then comes in guns blazing, so it's off to Garfield on a Psychic. After taking a Dragon Pulse, I'm able to go for a Payback, which surprisingly is enough for the KO. I really wasn't expecting that. Latias then sends in Alolan Raichu, who goes for a Thunderbolt before I go for a Payback for another one-shot. Last is Sigilyph, who sets up a Cosmic Power, raising her defense, meaning a Payback isn't enough for the KO. After taking an Air Slash down to below half, another Payback is enough for the KO, winning me the battle. How many times have I said KO in that recording? After this, I find a route which has a 50% chance of finding either an Oricorio or a Tyranitar. Luckily, I get the shiny Tyranitar, who is definitely joining the team. Unfortunately here, Hayes is killed, but come on, with a color scheme that ugly, you're bound to get killed at one point or another. Since I'm low on HP after the fight, I head to a rest stop, buy some items, skip a legendary encounter, and I'm already on my way to face the second Elite Four member. This time it ends up being Agatha, the Ghost Trainer and regular Elite Four member in Kanto. She leads off with Jellicent and I with Roosevelt. Roosevelt does what he does best and goes for an Acrobatics, which almost gets the KO. Luckily, he just has to tank an attack and then get the KO on the following turn. Sableye comes in, so I U-turn into Monroe for his debut battle, as Sableye just goes for a mean look, which is pretty useless. Sableye just basically signed his death warrant because an Earthquake on the following turn is enough for the KO, and then from there, Monroe is able to sweep Agatha's entire team, winning me the fight. After this, I go to the hub world, but there's really not much for me to do. I don't need an encounter, I can't evolve one of my Pokemon, and I don't want to face a strong trainer because we all know what happened last time. I just make a quick stop to the healing center, and from there we can go ahead and face the next Elite Four member. The next Elite Four member is Giovanni, who I thought was Norman based off the sprite. He leads off with a Steelix and I with Bull Moose the Roosevelt. I go for a bit of chip damage with a U-turn and then send in Pierce on a Stone Edge. I then go ahead and U-turn into Steelix as Pierce comes in on a Stone Edge. I go for an Arm Thrust on the following turn, which does decent damage as Steelix goes underground for a Dig. This means I can switch back into Roosevelt as Dig of course misses. I then U-turn back into Pierce as Steelix just goes for a Stone Edge, which actually crits. It's not like it really matters because another set of Arm Thrusts is enough to pick up the KO. Giovanni then proceeds to show me Sand Slash, and since this thing can hit me with super effective damage, I hard switch into Harrison on an Earthquake. I then go for an Ice Shard for decent damage as I tank a hard Gyro Ball, which I didn't even know this thing had. I then miss my Ice Fang, and then on the following turn, Sand Slash hits an Earthquake, but Harrison survives on just 7 HP. This means on the following turn I can outspeed and go for an Ice Fang, which gets the flinch and leaves Sand Slash barely alive. It's not like it matters because a follow-up attack gets the KO, baiting in Flygon. Luckily Flygon comes in and immediately meets an Icy Death, baiting in Seismitoad. I switch into Hoover here on an Echoed Voice. A few crunches seals the deal as Gastrodon comes in. Since I'm in the yellow HP range, I gotta switch out, so I switch into Roosevelt on a Rain Dance, and things are not looking good. In Acrobatics does decent damage, but then a Muddy Water KOs Roosevelt. Roosevelt was an amazing Pokemon and was crucial to the team, so things are not looking good. At the very least, Garfield able to come in and go for an Extrasensory, leaving just Quagsire. Quagsire tanks half from an Extrasensory and then misses a Muddy Water luckily. This means a final Extrasensory picks up the KO, but not without sacrifice. RIP Roosevelt. Since I only have 5 Pokemon left, I need a new encounter, and after a bit of searching, I find Nixon the Samurott. This means we found all 3 Unova starters for this playthrough, so that's pretty cool. The route is actually pretty tough, and we even see some legendaries along the way, but luckily my team pulls through without any casualties. The final Elite Four member of the playthrough ends up being Lieutenant Surge. He leads with Emolgia and I with Hoover. A Thunderbolt does decent damage as Emolgia sets up an Agility. After taking a critical hit discharge, I get the KO with a Thunderbolt. Second is Jolteon, so I stay in to hit a massive crunch before taking a limp discharge. A second crunch on the following turn is then enough for the KO as Togedemaru comes in. I switch into Monroe here as Togedemaru goes for a Spiky Shield, which fails. After the little rat goes for a super effective Felstinger, an Earthquake is enough for the KO. Man, this guy's busted. In fact, he takes out Boltund as Rotom comes in. I forgot this thing had Levitate, so it sets up a freeze charge as I miss my Earthquake. It's not like it really matters, and I connect with a Stone Edge somehow to get the KO. Last is Raichu, who obviously falls to an Earthquake, winning me the fight. After this, I get a new encounter, a strong Pokemon. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure these guys are shiny locks, so I have to run away. On the bright side, I pick up the TM for Ice Beam, which I teach to Harrison. With these preparations, we can take on the first champion, Norman, the deadbeat in his normal types. He leads with his Delcatty and I with Hoover. Delcatty immediately goes for a Fake Out for a bit of chip damage, meaning of course I flinch and miss my Thunderbolt. Luckily, I do connect on the following turn before being put to sleep with a Sing. After taking a few double slaps, I eventually wake up and KO with a Thunderbolt. And hey, all of my Pokemon go to level 100, so that's pretty cool. This baits in Pyroar, but luckily I have the perfect counter in Nixon, who takes an Incinerate for a bit of chip. After taking a massive critical hit Hyper Voice, an Aqua Tail is enough for the clean one-shot. Third is Litlicky, and since Nixon is low, I switch into Pierce on a Power Whip for a bit of chip damage. A set of Arm Thrusts from there is enough to KO Litlicky, which baits in Naganadel. I was surprised to see Norman had that, but I was even more surprised when the Air Slash crits and flinches. I can't stay in anymore, so I switch into Harrison on another Air Slash. I go for an Ice Beam, which barely leaves Naganadel alive as they go for an Air Slash. Once again, it's not like it really matters because another Ice Beam is enough for the KO, baiting in Greedent. I decide to switch into Monroe here, who sets up the sand as Greedent just goes for a failed counter. An Earthquake does around half of Greedent's HP on the following turn before Greedent retaliates with a Bullet Seed, which actually does a decent amount of damage here. Luckily, Monroe is an absolute unit here and gets the KO on the following turn with an Earthquake. This just leaves Norman's last Pokemon, Sausage Nibbles. Miltank hits me with a Wake Up Slap, leaving me in the red HP range as I go for an Earthquake, doing way less damage than expected. I switch out into Garfield here, whose Steel type allows him to fairly wall Miltank, as evidenced by the fact he doesn't take much damage from a Wake Up Slap. After taking a Gyro Ball, Garfield is able to go for an extra Sensory, barely leaving Miltank alive. This means he takes one more Gyro Ball before an extra Sensory is enough for the KO, winning me the fight and the first champion battle. But it's not over yet, as we have one more fight left. After going back to the hub world, I see if I can pick up a new Pokemon, but Ursaring's not the best Pokemon, especially this late in the game. I also pick up some items, so here's my final team for this challenge. It's the same team I've been using for a while, but here they are in case you forgot. Let's do this for Roosevelt and Fillmore. Now the champion could be any gym leader, elite 4 member, or champion, so you can imagine my surprise when it turns out to be Red. Red leads with Pangoro and I with Hoover. Hoover gets off a critical hit Thunderbolt before tanking a low sweep. Luckily, a second non-critical hit Thunderbolt is enough for the KO as Red sends in his Emboar. I stay in and I hit a Thunderbolt for around half of Emboar's HP as he goes for a Flare Blitz, taking out Hoover. RIP buddy. Luckily, I have the perfect counter in Nixon, who unleashes the Gates of Water with a Surf, which gets the KO on Emboar. Anyway, Red sends in Shaman, so it's off to Pierce, who takes decent damage from an Energy Ball despite it being resisted. Pierce then dodges a Sweet Kiss and kills with a super effective Flamethrower on the following turn. Fourth is Vivillon of all things. This thing should not be on a champion team. She somehow outspeeds and goes for a Quiver Dance, raising her special stats and her speed before being KO'd by a Flamethrower. Red then shows me a Dugong, so a set of arm thrusts barely leave the Seal alive, and I tank an Aqua Tail, leaving me in the yellow HP range. It's not like it really matters because I outspeed and go for another arm thrust to get the KO. And this just leaves his last Pokemon, Weezing. A Flamethrower leaves this thing in the yellow as she goes for a Destiny Bond. Yeah, this isn't really looking good for Pierce. I KO with a Flamethrower, which obviously takes out Pierce, but it also wins me the battle and the run, so realistically, who cares? Honestly, that was a super fun run. Emerald Rogue is a great game and I totally recommend playing it. I'll leave the patch file in the pinned comment. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe for daily Pokemon content, and follow my Twitter account for extra content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.